A black man is now President of the United States of America. Did Barack Obama's inauguration trigger a new phase in our history? Have we now become a post-racial America? These questions and many more today on Fresh Outlook. We're going to begin, though, with this report from Cherry Greg Mincy.
In March 2008, President Barack Obama, then candidate Obama, gave his historic speech on race right here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center. Just months later, he was elected the first African-American president of the United States. But his historic victory begged the question, has America moved into a post-racial era?
Really are not a post-racial society. If we were, then the Shirley Sherrod fiasco would have never happened. Mass incarceration of blacks, especially black males, wouldn't be an issue. And the miseducation of black children all across this country in urban centers as well as rural places wouldn't be an issue.
Jerry Mondesire of the NAACP says that even though America has elected its first African-American president, the black community remains far behind.
The net worth for the average African-American is around $3,000. Did you know that? The average net worth for a white American is what? Over almost $100,000.
Race should not matter. Race should not be an issue.
Diana Reamer of the Philadelphia Tea Party Patriots says much of the perceived racial tension is caused by the liberal media.
If the news media continues this race issue, that's not going to be good.
To honor the 47-year anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, these young professionals got together to discuss the state of race 2 years after the Obama election.
I personally don't like the idea of continuing to organize thoughts and ideas about how society, at least American society, should be run around the concept of race.
Race has always mattered, and if it's not going to be race, it's going to be some other type of distinguishing characteristic.
You can almost always tell when someone is black or Hispanic or Indian or whatever, because we have particular features that are unique to us.
There's Obama, and a far way down is the rest of all black politicians, and a far way down is the rest of the African American community. And in every statistic that's measurable between African Americans and non-African Americans, we still find ourselves, and oftentimes at the bottom end of those statistical categories.
Even though the debate will continue, one thing's for sure, Americans will work hard to close the racial divide.
We've elected one American president of the United States. We're in the process of changing America.
Maybe there's a way that we can bridge that gap.
For Fresh Outlook, I'm Cherry Greg Mincy.
This is a tough topic. Sometimes it's taboo, and it certainly stirs up a lot of emotions, but we're going to talk about it today with our two guests. I've got with me to my far left, Rosa Clemente. She was the 2008 Green Party vice presidential candidate, and she's also a community organizer, an independent journalist, and a hip-hop activist. Thanks a whole lot for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
And also Dr. Richard Williams. He's a professor in the Department of Sociology at Rutgers University on the New Brunswick campus, and he's the author of a book, Hierarchical Structures and Social Value, with Cambridge University Press. Thank you for coming as well.
Thanks for having me, Diane.
Rosa, let me just throw it at you. Are we in a post-racial country here?
Well, I always say what Dr. Michael Eric Dyson says. We'll be post-racial when we're post-racism, and we're nowhere near there. And I think in the interview we just saw, one of the men speaking said it best, that at every statistical measure, whether it's education, housing, healthcare, prison population, HIV status, there are massive amounts of inequality, particularly in this economic recession, massive inequality for women of color. I read a report a couple months ago that came out from the Center for Economic Opportunity that said that the value, the net worth of women of color against white women is we earn 5 cents, or we are worth 5 cents to every $1 that white women in America are. So the inequalities, particularly for women, because often when we talk about racism, we center a lot of it on men. Richard, and we forget about talking about the specific inequalities that affect women of color also.
I want your opinion in here too. Are you agreeing with what Rosa's saying? Are we still mired in racism here?
In essence, even though the approach that I take tends to be a little different, it tends to be more theoretical. So what I'm interested in is, where does the question, the idea of is the society post-racial come from? And my sense is that it's a reflection of the hopefulness that the society has.
I was going to ask, is it wishful thinking?
It is. Well, it's wishful thinking. It's hopefulness. It's a desire to move quickly past the issues that have given rise to the society as it presently exists. Now, there's the history of U.S. society is a contentious one. It has lots of positive Enlightenment ideals, but it has serious social problems. So the ideal of post-racial is, okay, we've gotten beyond all of the basic negatives that have given rise to the society.
We like to think we've developed that much as a people.
Exactly.
We're going to have to take a very quick break, and we're going to come back and we're going to tackle this subject much more in depth. So if you will stay with us, we've got a lot more very interesting conversation to come. Is America post-racial? Could it ever even be? We're talking about this today with our two guests, Rosa Clemente and Dr. Richard Williams. Rosa, let me ask you, because you did bring up women, typically we think of racism as being black versus white. That's it. Right. You say women of color are also an issue, and you have different ethnicities in your own background.
Yeah, women of color, but I think the one thing that we need to start acknowledging that there are now another group of people, and a lot of college students and a lot of younger people have been naming themselves brown, i.e. Latinos in this country, right? Or even now the target of hate in this country, particularly Mexican, dark-skinned Mexicans, and Muslims and Arabs in this country.
Well, does it not all depend on where you are in the country and what the influx is?
I think it's not only where you are, I think it's a generational issue too. As many older African Americans, whether they agreed with every politic of Barack Obama, that moment was a historical moment that they thought would never happen. A younger generation, what we call a hip-hop generation, I think has been having more of an inclusive discussion around race as it pertains particularly to Latinos like me who identify as Afro-Latino, we identify as Black Puerto Ricans, because obviously not only do we share some common ancestry and common history, we also share some of the same common problems, particularly in urban centers. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that we not think of Black as just African American, that there are the Black people in this country from Haiti, from Africa to Puerto Rico to Brazil.
And we've historically targeted even Nordic peoples, Irish people, Italian immigrants. I mean, at
any given moment.
Exactly. Yeah. And do you see, Richard, that there's anything happening within this country right now that is creating new targets of racism? I mean, you talk about the social construction of race and ethnicity. Right. How does that factor into this picture?
Well, I mean, the difficulty is that if we look only at the contemporary period, we're going to see relationships between populations that are contentious and problematic. But it strikes me that the fundamental problem in the society is a historical problem. Now, the society has not yet come to grips with how it was created. Right? Now, recently, I think about 3 years ago, the Prime Minister of Australia apologized to the Aboriginal population for the government's treatment of that population. I think we're, light years away from a U.S. president actually standing up and apologizing to African Americans, not to single African Americans and Native Americans, meaning the sort of baseline of the society, and then move on to apologizing to ethnic Americans who built the canal system, et cetera.
I agree with Dr.
Is it like a healing process?
Well, it needs to be acknowledged that
yeah.
Africans in this country were forced here and for 400 years were enslaved. And I think that this is the only country that has been part of the Middle Passage, the African slave trade, that has refused to apologize. The closest we ever get to that is John Conyers bringing up the bill on reparations, which President Barack Obama, from the beginning of his campaign, said that was an issue that he was not agreeing with, that was going to be no discussion. This idea of looking forward before you apologize to these two particular populations, there will never be a healing.
Well, can I look at it as a devil's advocate, and being the only Caucasian person here on the set, I don't want it to seem like I'm stirring up the racial pot, so to speak, but a lot of white Americans think, haven't we moved past this? I don't have slaves. I don't know that my family had slaves. I think it was wrong. I think it was an abhorrent thing that happened in history. Why do we have to keep going back there?
Well, the why is precisely that if to move forward, one has to go back. And I think you said it nicely, which is this is a delicate issue, but I think it's delicate for a whole series of reasons. One is it's not the case that asking the society to apologize is blaming whites for anything, especially whites in the contemporary world. And besides the fact that the vast majority of whites never owned slaves. So one has to acknowledge that. So the problem is a historical problem. It's a problem having to do with the history of the society itself. And in fact, individual whites, collective groups of whites should not apologize. It's a governmental
So the government has to step, right. But then we owe a lot of apologies then, don't we? I mean, we've got to go.
Let's start.
But the government
the sooner
has
we
given
start,
apologies,
the better.
where there's been to Jewish people, where the United States government had some hand in the bad things that happened in World War II, to the Japanese that were interned, and when you think about it, America would not be America, and this is the bad part, without the slaughter of indigenous people and the enslavement of African. There would be no American economic structure without that. So I think an apology would go a long way, but I'm also a radical. I would like an apology. I'm an African descendant, so is my father, but it's more about how do we now structure, or how do we get rid of inequity in institutions and really deal with inequity?
Okay, and let's.
I think that.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, can we take a break right here? Sure. Because this is obviously generating a whole lot of conversation. Right. Let's pick up on this line. When we come back, please stay right there. We're going to be gone only a few moments. Are we in America living in a post-racial society? I think the answer clearly is no, that we're not, at least according to Rosa Clemente and Dr. Richard Williams, our guest today, and I think a lot of people would definitely agree. And Richard, you say that there's something that is fundamental to resolving this issue.
Well, once it's in effect, we would know that the society is post-racial, and that has to do with housing.
Housing? Housing
segregation is like the most fundamental feature of American society. It's taken for granted. It's the notion of communities are built around it. The black community, the Mexican community, the ethnic communities are built around that notion. But it's a fundamentally race-based perception of how people should live. As long as people live separate from each other and only incidentally bump into each other in the mall, incidentally bump into each other at school, et cetera, you don't have any kind of interaction that can lead to sympathetic understanding. Back to my point of post-racial means we're not using race as a basis for helping another person, a basis for understanding another person. So housing segregation, if that's not solved, where an individual has the capacity to buy a house anywhere in the society, they should be able to do so. If that's not solved, then you're not going to solve the problem of education and the issue of politics and the black seat and black politicians, et cetera. All of those things will just continue, and we will never, ever enter an era of post-raciality.
And I have to say, to be honest, I've grown up in lily-white neighborhoods. When I was young, I don't remember seeing a single person of color until perhaps I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, which it doesn't strike me until we have a conversation like this, and then I think through my friends, and I think, I don't have many friends of color, and they seem to be occupied with other people of their group, so to speak. Do you see this as a big issue too, Rosa?
I mean, housing, for our generation, we probably won't own homes. We're talking about an entire community that's been decimated the last 3 years over predatory lending. And this subprime mortgage mess really was predatory lending against working class African American and Latinos. So I live in the Bronx. I can walk miles without ever seeing a white person. And I'm sure there are white people in Queens and Howard Beach that could walk miles without ever really having to see a black person. So I understand, yes, segregation in housing. Schools are more segregated now in some areas that they were not Plessy versus Ferguson, I'm sorry, pre-19 Brown versus Board of Education. But what I think is the biggest factor is economic inequalities at this point for my generation.
You're talking about earning power, paychecks?
Earning power, paychecks, the fact that we have 27% of young youth of color that are chronically unemployed. If people understand that working as a teenager begins to build your skills, the fact that we have 52% dropout rate in New York City for public education.
They're all related fundamentally to housing, because the educational system is built around
And that's
housing,
what I'm saying. I would
right?
agree with you. And it's going to be worse now with this last 3 years of predatory lending, and that the majority of foreclosures are amongst African American and Hispanic people. And I think neighborhoods are going to be more segregated than ever before.
What do you think about the issues of crime and imprisonment as well?
Well, imprisonment, I mean, for young black men. I mean, we have a fantastic book that just came out, Michelle Alexander, that talks about the new Jim Crow. We had 2.2 million prisoners in the United States of America. 85 to 90% of those are African American and Latino men, and an increasing number of women. Women of color are beginning to fill the ranks of prisons.
But what's creating those ranks? Go ahead.
What's creating it is, again, housing is at the core, because the educational system is funded by taxes on housing. So if you've got segregated communities with income disparities, essentially what you're going to get are school systems that are skewed towards separate and unequal. They continue to be. And as long as we say, well, this community, the white community versus the black community or the ethnic communities, that they should be doing as much as they can for their own group. That's sort of an absurd way of thinking about a society. So prisons and unemployment, all of those things are built upon housing. Like the greater the ability of all segments of the society to live next to each other, then they will become educated equally or nearly equally.
All right, we have to take a very short break, but I would like to resume in just a few moments. We hope you'll stay right there. Can we become a post-racial America? We've been talking about this for some time. We've spent a couple hundred years not succeeding at this. Are there any models we can follow for achieving that goal?
I mean, I think
historical models.
And
I mean, it's
is there anything
happening?
Is there any country that sets a good example for us? Are there any things happening locally within some state, within some community that you've seen that provides the guidelines for us to do this?
Well, I mean, see, the question. The question raises this issue of like the immediateness of things. In other words, social movements, electing more individuals, like people becoming more involved at the community level. That's one approach, and I think that's a legitimate approach, and essentially Rosa's approach. But my approach, which is more long-term, is trying to think about what is the basic cognitive, what is the basic thinking process that's a problem within the society. And the basic problem is that we don't operate under the assumption that people who are different from each other can actually relate to each other as human beings. Whatever we say, we still haven't gotten to that point
Can we
yet.
get there, though, or is it just human nature? We're stuck with it.
Well, to say it's human nature implies that we are just
helpless.
biologically, and I don't think that that's true.
Well, it's going to be rough. I mean, we have Tea Party elements that are racist. We have a Democratic Party that has completely let down African American, Latino, particularly working class people. And that's a discussion now we need to have. Within African American and Latino communities, there's also an elite class of people, whether they be politicians or some real money makers, that are now separate from what it is that the majority of African American and Latino people
So this isn't
need.
helping the picture either.
No, my hope is, this is my solution for that when we talk about electoral politics. I think that African American Latinos really need to reconsider their blind allegiance to a Democratic Party that continually, particularly leaves out all working class people. And I think it's time that these people begin to look at third party politics, not only on a local level, but on a congressional level and a Senate level, because that's when we're talking about monies that come into the community.
That's partially true, but the reality is, if you look at the history of the U.S. society, ethnic groups have survived through economics, not through politics.
But we won't. This not within economic structure, capitalism. That I'm not like with all my other comrades around the world that they're seeing capitalism fall, and that's really probably a good thing. But in this country, we have to talk about that there is now a black elite and a Latino elite. Look, I graduated from Cornell University with an Ivy League degree. I'm married to a husband that because of his felony conviction can never make a job or get a full-time job. There are serious inequities that now have to be, we have to deal with them as working class people against people that have resources and are keeping them away. Let Richard make his point,
because we are getting short on time.
No, I mean, my point is just that if you transform the debate into the black elite versus the non-elites, just the regulars, then essentially it undermines progress, because progress in the society, whether one wants to acknowledge it or not, is made economically. It's so that population is doing something positive and constructive. I'm not saying that everything is just pro-capitalism and that's the end of it. But the point is that group also has to be supported and place expectations on them, and that they lobby for other
Can I ask each of you just a quick yes or no at the end? Are we making progress, or is this just a lost cause at this point? Are we making any headway?
Not a lost cause, but I think post SB 1070 in Arizona, we've gone way back.
All right, Richard?
It's not a lost cause by any means, but there are some clear targets that we would, if we followed them, we would know whether it's okay or not.
Well, Professor Richard Williams, Rosa Clemente, thank you so much. Obviously, we could go on for hours with this debate, and I'm sure this country will continue to debate this for some time to come. Could the end of racism in America really begin with something as simple as "I'm sorry" and an effort to better integrate our neighborhoods? Are we brave enough, confident enough to make that attempt? We hope today's discussion has given you a fresh outlook that might translate at some point into positive action. Thank you for joining us.